Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions,
common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Marc Sholes. He's a New York City psychotherapist for individuals and couples. And the topic we're going to talk about today is how to reset your romantic GPS. He has a book called Reset Your Romantic GPS, Why You Steered Toward the Wrong Partners and How to Change Direction for the Better. So, Marc, thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me, Richard.
Yeah, if you would, I always like to ask people about their history, how they got into the field that they're in. And after that, I'd like to ask you about your current work. So if you would, just tell me a bit about your background.
I'm a psychotherapist and a psychoanalyst in New York City. And that means went to psychoanalytic training, which is a postgraduate after being licensed. And it's just sort of a deepening kind of psychotherapy, a way of deepening one's listening and understanding how, our personalities are often shaped from our early experiences in our familial milieu. And I've been doing this for 35 years in New York City. I teach and I train other therapists. And the way I got into the profession originally is I had a mother that was leaned towards depressive. She was more of a depressive. And I was, kind of born as a precocious listener. And I became good at and attuned at being able to sort of understand her. And so over the years, I became quite good at it. And so it led me to the profession and ultimately to the work I do and the book I wrote.
All right. What was your goal with the book? What does that mean to reset your romantic GPS?
Yeah, well, the book is really an introduction to something called attachment theory. And I'll tell you just a little bit about that. And so there's secure attachments growing up and insecure attachments growing up. And based on your attachment style, it really kind of narrates and dictates who you're going to be drawn to as an adult. And these kind of styles, these kind of emotional languages are imprinted literally by 2 years of age. So even before you learn to talk, there's this kind of internal GPS that's going to guide you to what feels like a familiar language of connecting. And basically a secure attachment style comes out of an early childhood of attunement, and where an infant in a child's early, needs, physiological needs, emotional needs, needs for comfort and regulation and attunement are generally met in a good enough way. And what happens is that the child internalizes this sense that that the world is responsive to them, that their needs and their discomforts are going to be soothed and cared for. And they internalize this experience and sense that the world is a safe place and that their needs are tolerable, desirable, and are going to ultimately get met. And that's a wonderful thing. It's like it's sort of like having a life jacket in the ocean of life, where you have a sense of buoyancy and you can approach obstacles and challenges with a sense of anticipating that you're going to be okay.
Okay. What are the attachment styles that you mentioned? Before we go forward, if you wouldn't mind, how many are there and what are they?
Well, there are 4 attachment styles. There's the secure and insecure attachment styles. In the insecure attachment styles, there's an anxious ambivalent style, which is where you are both kind of drawn to, a caretaker for comfort, but that you're also anxious about it. You're not sure what the response is going to be. Then there's an anxious avoidance style, which is you're drawn to someone, or you're needing comfort, but you are angry. You're already angry that you're not going to get your needs met, or that there's going to be a cost to getting those needs met. And then there's a disorganized.
Well, one second. So some people they attach, but I guess it sounds like they're emotionally cynical about it, or they're, I guess, defeatist. Like they attach, but they're like, I guess their predilection is, this is not going to work out, but I have to do it, or I'm just going to do it anyway. But I'm thinking that something negative is going to happen, or it's not going to work. Is that what's describing?
I mean, they're not going to attach anyway. They're going to attach because we do have, as humans, we have a need for, one of our motivations is connection and attachment. We really need and yearn for those kinds of things in order to, regulate ourselves. And so with an insecure ambivalent attachment, right, you're drawn to a person, but you're not sure, you're not totally comfortable. You don't anticipate that your needs are going to get met. And with an insecure attachment that's more of an avoidant, you actually have a feeling and a need that comes up, and you might withdraw from people. You might go towards them, maybe for an evening or for a moment, your needs are met, and then you pull away because you really anticipate that it's not safe. And then there's a third category, which is a disorganized category. We don't really talk about that. That's just where you're sort of really severely neglected, and you basically are very confused around attachment. You can't really tell whose need is going on here, whether it's your need or the other person's need. I don't really address that sort of style, although that's a real style.
Okay. All right. So we got the types of attachment, and please keep going.
Yeah. So, so for an insecure attached person, the way that develops is that early on, instead of having your needs met on a consistent basis, the infant and the child's needs are inconsistently or not met. Experiences dysregulation, experiences of needing to be comforted, gas, need to be touched. Those kinds of needs are met very inconsistently. And so what happens here is very interesting and in many ways very tragic, because the child doesn't internalize a sense that their needs are welcomed and that they can anticipate those needs getting met. What happens is they form a sense of shame around those needs, and because they're not getting met, there's a kind of sense that those needs are not okay. They're not desired, they're not invited. And so those needs get sort of sidelined. And instead, the child becomes preoccupied with the parent. What can I do in order to feel more connected to the parent? So the burden of the attachment is on the child. Instead of the parent being attuned to the child and walking in the child and infant shoes, the child has to figure out how to read and how to accommodate to the parent. And what happens there is a sense of security is not internalized. The sense of security now exists outside the child. And so the child grows up into an adult whose security and who regulates their anxiety through being attached to the other, but it's through reading and being accommodating to the other that assures the connection. And that's more of an insecure attachment. And there are a lot of repercussions to that. One is that you never really have this sense of internalized security, so your motivation becomes to regulate yourself, to ensure your the stability of your connection. It's an ongoing process and becomes dominant and doesn't really allow you to think about or figure out what's best for you, because there's sort of a need for more immediate gratification and tension reduction. I don't know, does that make sense?
So when it comes to romance.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Do people have to go back and, with help figure out their attachment style and see maybe how that's influencing or maybe even subverting their ability to be close to somebody as an adult?
Yeah, exactly. So the reason that I wrote this book, and you can Google attachment theory, and is because by becoming aware of what our style is, you can begin the process of being conscious of what's motivating you and what's driving you, and that is the start of being able to change your attachment style. And because the attachment style is your language for connecting, the process of changing it and kind of walking in the opposite direction of what feels familiar can be challenging. It can be frightening. It requires a willingness to mourn what isn't and to sort of appreciate what is. And ultimately, it's a way of, I like to sort of say, privileging character over chemistry, being able to actually see who the person is in front of you and whether or not they're actually able to meet your needs, as opposed to this feeling of just kind of chemistry that's feeling exciting and stimulating. And the fantasy is this person is going to finally make me whole, which of course is rarely the case.
What happens if, sure, in the book, The 5 Love Languages. So an example comes to mind. What if someone's love language, the primary one, is physical touch, but let's say their partner is abused and hit a lot. And so when they want physical touch from that partner, the partner's background makes it so that physical touch was always a negative thing. So maybe they don't touch the person, and then the person feels unloved, but it's not for reasons they think it is. It's because of the other person's childhood.
Yeah. I mean, when you're dealing with communicating about one's love languages, and you're already in a relationship where you're speaking and you're open and you're taking the risk of letting the other person know you and understand you. And so if love languages are often different, and part of a relationship is understanding the person you're with and appreciating if your language can't be, privileged because of your partner's trauma, there's room to talk about that. There's room to work on that. And ultimately, if it's a good enough relationship, it can handle that. It may be that differences are too great, and there are relationships that in the end won't work because one's need for a kind of affection is too great. But you're already dealing with a positive relationship when you can talk about what it is you need from the partner, or what it is that's not allowing you to give your partner what they need. And with a more insecure attachment, there are two things. One is a person usually isn't fully in touch with what their needs are because they haven't had the opportunity to sort of have an environment where they were allowed to kind of experiment and be in their bodies and feel safe enough. So the first thing is you have to know what your needs are, what your love language is. And after that, you have to be also comfortable with a person who can, be attuned to those needs and even be there for those needs. And that is sometimes also a new and different experience for somebody with an insecure attachment. So
what is a romantic GPS? Is it a seeking mechanism where you seek the types of romance that fit your childhood and your background, minus the landmines you've had, but like what is it?
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's that we have this sort of internal GPS, and what we're drawn to is a kind of configuration that we're familiar with, that there's hope that if I can just get it right this time, if I can just figure the other person out, if I could just, teach them or help them become a whole person, then, the trauma from my past, and then, the person will love me in the way that I haven't been able to be loved in the past. There's a real draw, that chemistry. It's your heart starts to beat, your eyes kind of your pupils dilate. And there is a sense that, you're finally on the right track. And it's not a new thing. I talk to my patients about Odysseus, in Homer. And, Odysseus is drawn to the Song of the Sirens. And he tells his men to tie him to the mast of the ship so he cannot turn the ship in the direction of the sirens who are singing to the longings of Odysseus. And he begs his men to untie him when he starts feeling that kind of seductive pull, and they don't. And he's able to make it past the sirens back home. And symbolically, the metaphor is that, you have to be able to recognize those sirens, and not only to recognize them, but what I like to call make the discomfort of a healthy choice. That by not turning into the sirens, you're doing something that is very uncomfortable because you don't really believe that, you're going to be okay unless you follow that kind of old pattern. And those are the discomfort of healthy choices. And the more of those you can make, the closer to a more regulated home you'll become.
So do you think, would you be able to give an example based on each attachment style, how they might show up in a romantic relationship in a way that, again, causes strife within the relationship, but they don't even realize it's because of their path?
Yeah. I have clients who, they're with an ambivalent attached person. So I have people who have been dating the same, person for a number of years, and who continue to, focus on the things that the person doesn't have, as opposed to all of the things that they do have. And, this person hasn't necessarily developed yet to the place where they can kind of realize that another person is not going to meet all their needs. And they haven't sort of given up that hope. And at this point, they're, in their 40s, and with somebody who's completely good enough to be with, but who's still holding out hope that there's a person that's going to be better matched. So, that's one just simple example. Another, go on.
When people, I'm just thinking of things I've heard recently. Like a friend of mine, he said he seems like wishy-washy in his decisions with his wife. And recently he said, all right, I'm deciding X, Y, Z. And she responded with like, oh, that means you don't love me. You've never loved me, that kind of thing. It's all a sham. So I know it's not because of what he did, but, it gave me the feeling that this person's wife was not talking to him, but literally talking to her parents, but talking to him. You know what I mean? That's the feeling I got. It was really strange.
That's a wonderful example. Exactly. I mean, where a person in a relationship makes a decision that within a committed relationship, and the person, because you haven't accommodated fully your partner, and they see that as somehow a threat or a sign that you are, on your way out, and the only way to prove your love is, by proving it, by not being sort of a separate person, that is definitely, coming from the past, not the present. And if you can recognize that, if you can notice when you're triggered, if in this case, if your friend's wife could notice that she's having kind of strong feelings, intense feelings around something that is relatively neutral, she could begin to be curious about what that experience is. Because what's going to happen if she doesn't is she's going to react this way to your friend. Your friend's going to get annoyed with her or feel like she's being naggy or crazy. And she's going to be responded to most likely exactly how she probably was responded to as a kid, instead of the ability to feel, to be able to articulate what she's really feeling, and for your friend to really be able to be there for her. She's going to co-create a situation in which she gets responded to in the same way she had.
So is there a name for this? Is the person talking to their trauma, or is it the trauma talking? Like, how would you describe what I just mentioned I noticed without it being obviously insulting to the person, but in a useful way? Is there a phrase for this or a terminology for it?
I mean, the classic term in psychoanalytic thinking is transference, right? It's a repetition of an old trauma, and so the trauma is being transferred or projected onto the partner. And with relationships, it's usually a co-created dance. Two people, kind of create these kind of moments where this is happening, because your friend, he might be able to, if he was able to say to his wife, listen, I think something's happening here. I want to reassure you that I'm, not, leaving, or that it's not a reflection of how I feel about you. And if he could, it's possible she could hear it if he were able to sort of speak to her in a certain way. So, I mean, that's what it's called. And, most of us are in some form or another of this kind of dance, depending on our consciousness of our GPS. The reason I want to, again, my motivation for writing the book is just to introduce this idea for people to begin to think about what's happening inside of them, and how it sort of you need to become a conscious and aware of it in order to begin to notice it, and then talk about how to make those changes.
Oh, it's all right. No, so does your book like first help people to identify when this is happening, and then gives them like a heuristic or a method to slowly bring themselves to an understanding and then change their behavior, notice it and then change it over time to improve their love life? Or like, what is the flow of the book that a reader is taken through?
Well, it's to improve relationships that already exist, but it's also really to help single people who are looking for, for their mates, and find themselves repeatedly drawn to a similar kind of, person, to help them, see that something's going on inside. And the first thing to do is to learn about it, to become aware of it. And then there are a lot of ways to facilitate and to kind of help grow that awareness that have to do with our everyday life. It's one example is our cravings. We crave, let's say, we crave a lot of things, but let's say food. And a lot of times we just crave something. We We go into our fugue state. We go, we order it, we get it. Nothing will stop us. And, I coined the phrase, be brave, ask why you crave. So, for instance, if your thing is pepperoni pizza, nothing wrong with pepperoni. You notice, if you can just take a moment and bring some consciousness to notice that you're craving something. How strong is this longing for this food? What might you feel like if you don't order it? What are you feeling that might be underneath the craving? Not don't order the food, just begin to bring consciousness to it. And by doing that, you begin to even notice what a longing or a craving is. The other, of course, is 5 minutes of mindful meditation to develop a practice of noticing, sitting and breathing and noticing what you're feeling and noticing feelings that are uncomfortable. And instead of getting up and trying to get away from those feelings, creating a space in which you're in a relationship with yourself and allowing yourself to get to know and sit with uncomfortable feelings.
How fast, how much
on.
training does it take to catch yourself in the moment? And how much time do people have? Like, is it 3 to 5 seconds enough for them to change their reaction or stop their reaction that they would normally give?
Yeah, people have a couple of seconds to notice. Maybe depends what it is. Yeah, it's a very short window. But the good news is that you have so many opportunities. Just being alive allows you so many opportunities to notice. And it could be as simple as, people with an insecure attachment, they often kind of dread exercise. They dread anything that focuses on the self, because the self is not the thing that an insecurely attached person focuses on, it's the other. So if you have to go and, exercise is such a great thing to do for the brain. So if you feel the dread of like, well, I just rather not do it, you notice that dread and you begin to have a relationship with that dread. It's just that you begin to notice that's just a feeling. Bring the dread with you to the treadmill. Allow those feelings.
What if you call it the dreadmill?
Very good. That's I would have thought about that. That's the dreadmill, exactly. And if you walk in the direction of these uncomfortable feelings, you discover that not only are you going to be okay, but there's something on the other side. And the thing on the other side is a sense of well-being. And so as a person begins to realize they can walk in the opposite direction of what they're familiar with, and that they're not going to fall in this existential, black hole, but that there's actually going to be something there that they receive, they can begin to take better care of themselves. And when you take care of yourself, you're going to be drawn to somebody who is there for you. Because if you like yourself, you're not going to put up with somebody who treats you poorly. And that's really where the attachment style changes.
So what do you hear from people that are starting to address this or that are successfully addressing it? What do they tell you? Like, oh, hey, this and that happened and I reacted this way instead of that way? Or like, again, anecdotally, what are you hearing from people when they're attempting to apply it and they're successful at it, let's say?
Yeah. So, with some people, it's about when somebody is not, especially in the dating world, it will often look like if somebody hasn't been responded to in a day or two, and the person who I'm working with or I'm talking to begins to get more obsessed with that person who has been non-responsive, as opposed to a feeling of entitlement that why would I want to be with somebody who is not really available? When they're able to make the choice of, instead of pursuing and trying to figure out what's going on in the other person, when they're able to just kind of move on with some help, very quickly feel better about themselves. And the opposite is also true. What you'll hear is that when people are available, people with an insecure attachment will often feel, I just don't feel that chemistry. They're responding to me. when I reach out to them, they get back to me. They show up to the restaurant on time. In fact, they've even made the plan. But you know what? I just don't feel that sense of chemistry. Well, I begin to try to help them sit in that space that they may not really be familiar or know how to speak that language or know how to appreciate that kind of person. But if they give it a chance and they spend some time there, they might find that other things about the person become attractive to them. So it's this kind of, work in both directions, leaving when the time is right and staying in something that feels different and sort of unfamiliar.
Okay. So do you think that people mistake chemistry for romance or chemistry for love? And if they're not feeling that, like a high degree of chemistry, that something is wrong with the relationship? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, chemistry is a tricky thing, right? Everyone needs a little bit of chemistry, but anyone will tell you in a successful long-term marriage or partnership that, chemistry comes and goes. And, bond that deepens in getting through periods where chemistry is not in the foreground are the things that deepen and often connect people in a way that is much sturdier. And so, yes, chemistry is too much chemistry, I think, is a sign that something, you got to think about what's going on. I do believe that.
Is there a chemistry to true relationship transition period? And is that where a lot of people get stuck? And, I guess every relationship is different, but is that a thing, and has that period been studied, the transition time?
Oh, you mean the period where, the sort of the falling in love is decreasing and the real relationship is emerging?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's the secret key. That separates the faint of heart, and that separates, however you want, the oil from the water, however you want to put it. In order to have a successful relationship, you have to be able to, that period of falling, you have to get to the other side and see, who am I with? Who is this person? Minus the chemistry. And, and I usually tell my clients or friends, I mean, I don't know where I came up with this, but over time, I usually say, you need about 6 months to really kind of see, the legs of the relationship. Because that's usually when some of the chemistry winds down and you see what you got. And you have to be able to, a person also has to be able to understand that a relationship it's never a panacea for making one whole, making a person whole. That is not what a relationship, that's not the job of a relationship. The job of a relationship is to be able to express who you are and have the other person hear it and possibly, meet those needs or possibly not, but certainly be there for you and hear you and, be a partner.
Yeah, I remember, my kids are now teenagers, but I remember when they were very young, first born, it's you got to watch out that your relationship with your spouse doesn't turn into like a business relationship. All right, you change the diaper, I'll clean up the dishes, or,
Yeah.
All right, what's, it seems like they can turn into a coworker if you don't watch out and deliberately spend time with them alone, solo, as, when you can, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, look, that is it. It is part of a relationship, and it is one of the hardest stages of a relationship, raising children and young children, because you really do need to be partners in that relationship, and you have a job to do, and it takes consciousness and mindfulness to make space for a relationship. And it evolves into kinds of attachments and connections that, you don't know until you've done it. Like, you don't know where it's going until you've done it. And it's a tricky time, those first, I don't know, raising, I guess, for the rest of your, having kids, those first 6 or 7 years are certainly challenging. And you got a partner when you can get through that.
Yeah, exactly. When when things are tough and there's not much time for chemistry. Those are really the tough times in a relationship to test everybody.
Yes.
And I guess I thought back to what's called the honeymoon phase. I've heard that phrase for the beginning of a relationship. So I guess the transition from the honeymoon phase to the this is reality long-term relationship phase is also another difficult navigation point in a relationship.
Yeah, and that's really where all the honey is, by the way, after the honey, that honeymoon phase. The real benefits of a relationship exist when that's worn off. And, the compassion I have, about it, that I have towards people with more of an insecure style is that, it has nothing to do with who a person is. It's really a kind of a GPS that was planted in one at an early age. And it does have an influence. And if you follow that GPS, it usually leaves you feeling fairly bad about yourself because, you're not able to, because the need for security is so much in the foreground, you don't have the ability to kind of think deeply and make kind of choices that are best for the self. And so people often suffer quite a lot until they become aware of their style and they begin to work on it and change it. And one of the few good things that's come out of COVID is because it's really put mental health into the foreground, because anxiety and mental health has become such a important subject that, people are certainly learning about themselves a lot more than they used to. And therapy is something that people don't look, down upon as much anymore, or as a weakness. And there's certainly with social media, as much terrible things there are with it, there are also a lot of positive, podcasts and even some TikToks around mental health that are positive.
Okay. Well, very good. So let's restate. So your book is, let's restate the whole title of your book and where people can find it and resources and how to learn more from you if they want to, go further beyond the book.
So, Reset Your Romantic GPS, Why You Steer Towards the Wrong Partners and How to Change for the Better is available on Amazon. And I have a website, Marc Sholes, LSC, forget that, Marc Sholes, LCSW.com. If you want to contact me, and I have an Instagram account, Reset Your Romantic GPS on Instagram. So if you want to learn more, please don't hesitate.
Well, very good, Marc. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your wisdom. And I feel like I've learned a lot from speaking with you, and I think listeners will too. So again, thank you for what you do. And I encourage listeners to pick up this book because I think it'll be incredibly useful for them in their relationships. And I plan to do the same. So thank you, Marc.
Thank you, Richard. And I appreciate your having me on your show.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.